Tenemos ahora un tiempo para conversación.
So now we've got some
cuestiones
time
que
for
plantear.
discussing things or
Independientemente de eso, por la tarde
questions.
tendremos una sesión
In
de
the
diálogo
afternoon,
abierto,
we'll
pero
have an
en
open
estos momentos,
dialogue
cuestiones
session.
respecto a la presentación de
But if you have any questions
Gonzalo.
relating to Gonzalo's talk,
I'm all caffeinated right now, so just ask.
Yo tendría una pregunta aprovechando.
I have
Vosotros sois una
a
administración
question. You are a national
¿no?
administration, NOAA.
¿Cómo relacionáis o cómo os coordináis
How do
con las
you
otras
coordinate
administraciones?
yourselves with the
Por una parte, de
other
escalas
administrations
menores y por otra
at a
parte,
smaller scale?
específicas, por ejemplo, de
And
gestión
also
pesquera o
specific
dedicadas a algún cometido
administrations,
específico.
fisheries
Es una pregunta
administrations,
bien
or specific
interesante porque
goal administration. Well, this is an interesting
no es la
question
única
because
agencia
NOAA
que
is
se
not the
encarga de
only
proteger áreas
agency
protegidas,
that
ya sea
protects
marinas o costero-marinas.
MPAs, marine
Existen
areas,
otras dos
coastal
agencias al
areas.
menos
There are two other
que
agencies, at
tienen a nivel
least,
nacional,
at a
que
national
tienen
level,
muchísimo que decir.
that
Una que
have
es
a
la más
lot to
conocida de
say. One of
todas,
them
que muchos de
is
ustedes han oído hablar,
very well known.
el sistema de
You might have
parques
heard
nacionales de
about the
Estados
system
Unidos,
of
que es
national
una de las
parks of the
agencias
United
de
States. Is one
protección
of the
ambiental más grandes del país.
bigger
Creo que
environmental
algún presidente dijo
protection
que ha sido
agencies
la
in our
mejor
country.
idea que ha
I
tenido
think that
Estados Unidos
once
crear
some
los
president
parques
said
nacionales.
it was the best idea the
Y
States
yo
has
creo,
ever
en
had,
cierta medida creo que
creating the
estoy de
national
acuerdo.
parks, and I
Nosotros
agree
trabajamos
to a
mucho
certain
con ellos
extent.
porque
We
ellos
work a lot with
administran
them
todas
because
las áreas
they
protegidas en
manage
tierra.
all the
Por
land
otro lado, existe
protected
otra agencia que
areas.
se llama
There's
Fish
another
and
agency
Wildlife
called
Service,
Fish and
que
Wildlife
también es
Service,
parte, o el
and
servicio
it's
de
part
vida
of
silvestre,
the
que también es parte de la
Wildlife
misma
Service. It's
superagencia
part of
que
the
es
same
el Ministerio del Interior,
super
que
agency,
ellos se encargan, ¿no es cierto?, de la
the Home
conservación
Office, and they are in
determinados
charge of
ecosistemas
the preservation of
y
certain
determinadas especies, pero
ecosystems and certain
principalmente es la
species,
conservación
but
ecosistémica,
mainly the
bosques
ecosystem conservation
que son de
forests
importancia nacional.
that are of
Y
national
también, por
importance,
supuesto, de determinados
and
lugares
also
acuáticos y
of
marinos.
certain aquatic
Con
and
estas
marine
dos
areas.
agencias nosotros
So with these two
coordinamos
agencies,
muchas de
we
las
coordinate
actividades que
many of
hacemos
the
en las zonas
activities we
costero-marinas.
developed in the
Pero la
coastal marine
administración
areas,
pesquera
but the
y la
fisheries
administración
administration
de las zonas
and
de
the
interacción
administration
marino-costero,
of
por
the
ejemplo, los
areas
estuarios,
of interaction
están
between
dentro
the
de
coast
NOAA, es
and
decir,
the sea, like the
son
estuaries
agencias
are
diferentes,
within
pero
NOAA.
definitivamente
They
nos
are
coordinamos con
different
ellas.
agencies, but
El
we
problema
coordinate things
no
with
es
them.
la administración a nivel
The
nacional,
trouble
el
is not the
problema
national
en un
administration.
país como Estados
The
Unidos y en muchos
problem in a
países donde la
country such as the
administración
US and
marina
in many
pertenece a
countries
los
where the
gobiernos
marine
locales,
administration is
me da la
under the
impresión de que en
local
España son los
governments, and in
autónomos,
Spain
¿no es
I
cierto?
think these are the autonomous
Los
communities, right?
estados en Estados Unidos
The
tienen
states in
son los dueños de las
the
primeras 2 millas
US
marítimas.
are owners
Por lo
of the
tanto,
first 3
trabajar
maritime
con los
miles.
estados
Therefore,
es
working with
parte
the
de un programa
states is
nacional que se
part
llama
of a
el
national
Programa
program
Nacional de
called the
Manejo de
National
Zonas
Program
Costeras,
of Coastal Area
y con ese
Management.
programa
And with this
muchas
program,
veces
very
interactuamos
often
con los estados,
we
pero
interact with
es
the
una
states,
relación
but it is
difícil.
a difficult
Los
relationship.
estados tienen sus
The
propios
states have
objetivos, y
their
tienen sus propias
own staff, and they've got
visión de
their
ver las
own
cosas, por lo
vision,
tanto, y muchos estados no les gusta
and many states
que el
don't
gobierno federal, el
like to
gobierno
have
nacional
the
les imponga
federal
qué
or the
deben hacer,
national
por lo tanto,
government imposing things on them.
trabajar a nivel regional o
Therefore,
subregional es un
working
desafío
at a regional or a
grande
sub-regional
para la
level is a
agencia.
great challenge for our agency.
Sí, ahí te...
Bien, has comentado lo importante que es saber
We've talked
quién
about how
participa y en
important
qué
it is to
momento.
know
Pero
who
¿quién es el
participates
encargado
and
de
at what
decidir
time, but who
quién
is in
participa?
charge of deciding
Bueno,
who
eso es
is
parte de
involved?
un
Well, that's part
análisis, no es una
of
decisión
an
fácil.
analysis. It's not an easy
Generalmente en los procesos iniciales
decision, usually at the early stages
cuando uno
of
comienza la
when you
planificación como
begin
parte de un
to
proceso,
plan.
hay
As part
etapas
of a process,
de
there are
determinar, ¿no es cierto?
stages
Al menos en el caso
to
nuestro,
determine
nosotros
that.
hacemos
At
un
least in our
stakeholder
case, we
analysis.
do a stakeholder
Vemos
analysis.
quiénes son aquellas personas que tienen una determinación directa en un determinado problema, quiénes son aquellos que son inmediatamente afectados, quiénes son aquellos que tienen intereses económicos, quiénes son aquellos que se oponen o aceptan un determinado lugar, y quiénes son aquellos que de una u otra forma no tienen una relación directa, pero sin embargo tienen algo que decir porque son participantes indirectos de un determinado lugar. Generalmente los procesos de consulta comienzan por grupos a nivel sectorial. Primero son con los pescadores, con los grupos de turistas, con los inversionistas. Después, cuando se ven los problemas y los actores asociados a esos problemas, es cuando uno tiene que ver, bueno, quiénes son las personas o quiénes son aquellos actores que una determinada acción afecta. Es decir, la pesca como actividad afecta directamente a esta actividad, a otra actividad y a una tercera actividad. Y generalmente las consultas son escaladas. Primero se habla del nivel del sector, luego nosotros nos acercamos con 2 o 3 otros actores, dependiendo del problema. Y muchas veces se termina esto con una especie de plenaria participativa en la que se tratan de involucrar a muchos sectores, pero hay dos cosas que nosotros tratamos de evitar. Uno es invitar a todo el mundo al mismo tiempo, de primera vez, y segundo es tratar de que las personas, aunque muchas veces eso no lo podemos controlar, tratar de ver que las personas que representan a una institución realmente sean representativas de una determinada actividad. Pasa muchas veces que cuando uno invita al sector pesquero viene todo el mundo. Desde el pescador hasta el representante de la pesca. Entonces, hay que ser, muchas veces hay que jugar el rol de filtro en quién está no solamente representando a una actividad, sino que además representa un determinado sector o grupo de personas. No es solamente la actividad, sino que quién los representa y cómo los representa. Pero esto es un proceso, es decir, no hay una respuesta única porque esto requiere el análisis de cuáles son las influencias directas de un determinado lugar y los determinados sectores. Se hacen talleres y esto es un asunto escalado para nosotros, es decir, uno primero, dos después, y así va subiendo y muchas veces se hacen en grupo. ¿Quién lo hace? Quien hace ese proceso de llamado y consulta también es un actor.
Does the consultation process is a stakeholder as well.
Y es una cosa que a veces la gente que lleva a cabo un proceso no lo entiende o no lo quiere ver.
Don't understand that or don't want to see it. Very often I, as a government or as an agency, as NOAA, even though I want to carry out the process, or as an NGO, I want to carry out a process and I am calling people, very often this
tienen que ser hechas por personas que no sean percibidas por la comunidad o en ciertas comunidades como un ente que está causando problemas o como el enemigo, si uno puede llamarlo así. Muchas veces uno tiene que entender de que la mejor manera de llevar a cabo un proceso es dar un paso al costado. Es decir, yo no puedo ser quien maneje este proceso. Entender eso es muy difícil. La gente que se cree dueña de un proceso piensa que ellos deben hacer todo. Y la verdad no es así. Hay que tener muchísimo cuidado y entender y asumir que a veces el problema es uno mismo.
Sometimes we need to assume that the problem is ourselves.
Bien, no sé si hay alguna última pregunta.
And final question from the floor.
Sí. Tenemos 2 preguntas y ya.
We've got 2
Okay.
questions. And
English or Portuguese?
Yeah.
Move on.
Okay. So there are 2 things. One, I would try to push back your Chilean origin in asking the variability you are getting across the states in enforcement and compliance. How would it rate if you would consider wider systems? So, from the most stringent to the least stringent states systems, would this be a very narrow band of variability if you would compare with Chile or with Spain or with Portugal? and so how much of this would be relevant in a system that has weak enforcement and doubtful compliance? And the second question I had, if you would go a bit further into this champion research or the role of scientists, just give a few more lights of how you see this alternative way of producing knowledge in a system where there is a lot of...
Well, about the first question, I mean, I can see a lot of similarities for you know, when you consider problems of a scale, when you are actually working at the regional level, you know, with different actors, with different stakeholders, with different people that are part of a larger system, especially with the idea of enforcement. Enforcement is a big issue, especially when you go beyond certain boundaries. You know, when you go beyond certain national jurisdictions. You know, one of our main problems in the States is the boundaries with Mexico. You know, and I'm not saying that Mexico is the problem. I mean, we like to believe that, but it's not. I mean, in many cases, actually, it's the United States. You know, but don't say that to anyone. So in the case of Chile, Chile is a very particular country, you know, because we don't have any neighbors, you know. We don't. I mean, the only neighbor that we have, and many we can have, you know, is Peru, and there's a lot of illegal fisheries, you know, in oceanic areas, and you know, probably the closest thing we have in front of Chile is Easter Island. That is actually right now one of the largest marine protected areas in the world. You know, around another, you know, island that doesn't have any people. It's called Salas y Gomez Island. You know, so there's one of the largest areas there in which one of the most important issues is enforcement, because it's so far away. Enforcement, unfortunately, is not. It's probably one of the most difficult things to do, because normally protected areas do not have the capacity for enforcement. There's no staff, money, personnel. Probably one of the few areas in the United States that actually have a lot of enforcement, and they have a lot of experience on that in the transboundary, you know, aspects of an area is the Florida Keys in you know, the south of Florida, and this is part of, you know, the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico area, because there's a lot of illegal trafficking, illegal fisheries, illegal immigration in that specific area. So that in that specific case, there are agreements with other agencies that actually are using or giving, you know, the elements to NOAA and the people that work in the area to do it. Because enforcement in those cases is not just going out there, you know, seeing what people are doing and find them if they are, you know, is something that is necessary. In some cases, enforcement in this areas and with this type of characteristic can be really dangerous. The other area in California is called the Channel Islands, in which there are 3 agencies and 2 NGOs that are protecting the same area. And in those cases, you know, there is some specific, you know, alliance for enforcement. The base case of enforcement, I know, are those in which you have alliances, partnership with other agencies. One agency, one group really can't do much. And even if you put enforcement as part of the part of your management plans, enforcement are probably one of the most expensive things that you can do in a plan, and it will require a source of funding that is permanent. And it's, as I said, you know, enforcement is always attached to partnerships. You know, in some cases, the states actually give us money to do a specific aspects of enforcement of the management of the area, especially in those sanctuaries in which the boundaries are within states. In California is one of the big examples for that. You know, there's some others in Alaska and in the East Coast, you know, around the Boston, Massachusetts area. The second question was on, Well, just to respond in a short way, we normally, in those cases, when someone, and this is something that happened a lot, especially in fisheries, when someone doesn't agree with what the science is saying or what you are saying, based on scientific, information, what happened, and what have happened in many countries is actually that the other side normally tend to raise their own science, and that happened. The fisheries sector can actually fund better paid science, I would say so. That happened in human health. Like actually, a lot of pharmaceutical companies can actually tell you, if you take this, you're not going to die. Actually, this is really good for you. And well, the other side is saying the contrary. And so in order to avoid that, it's important to find those people, those champions that can actually can be in some way, accepted, I would say, by the two sides. Normally, we work with the state universities. What we do not work with, we normally do not work with NGOs, because big NGOs normally they have their own agendas. And even if the science may be great, the problem is that we are responding, or they are responding to specific donors. And in some cases, that is seen as an interest issue, an interest problem. So we don't do it.
Sí, una última pregunta. Very short.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is an easy one to answer, a short question, I'm sorry, but perhaps it's a question we can talk about later on, Juan. I'm interested in two things you mentioned. One was the issue about managing people, not resources, and also around the dynamics between the completion of a management plan. Now, I'm interested to know what point you think you need to talk about what the management issues will be, i.e. within a marine protected area, what activities will need to be restricted or curtailed, and at what point you should introduce that possibility. So in United States, in California, for example, you define proactively what activities within a state marine reserve or a marine protected area should be restricted, if I'm right. Whereas in Europe, we tend to work more reactively, i.e. saying, based on the condition of a feature, what human activity should be restricted. So I'm interested to have your opinion on what point in the process these possibilities should be introduced and how they should be treated through the development of the management plan.
This is it is a difficult question. I don't think we are so proactive in the States. I mean, I think a lot of the major environmental movements and actually creation of parks and protected areas have been the result of some issues and large issues. California, for instance, the moratorium for oil, exploration in state waters is basically a result of a major oil spill, in the 70s. And that is one of the reasons, because a lot of the protected areas, around the Monterey Bay, San Francisco Bay, and the southern, and the border with Mexico, are being created as a result of a major impact or issue that, happened. In the case of Massachusetts, there are several areas that are protected just because collisions of whales with vessels, and so they have to reroute basically some of the maritime transportation, just because there are certain congregation areas of marine mammals, that were affected. So some specific areas were created just for that specific issue, but after a lot of issues. I would say that probably the few areas I know that were created just because it was something important to protect, something important that that almost every sector, in some way decided that was important to do because it was of national interest, is when and there's no one site, there are several sites in which the main purpose or the trigger for the creation of that site was something associated or related to World Heritage, or heritage basically. Some specific, shipwrecks or specific areas that were of cultural importance for a specific place. The case of Massachusetts, with the Monitor, Marine Sanctuary. In the case of the big lakes, with the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, the same thing. Again, the other thing that actually sometimes bring a lot of attention is, or agreement, I would say, between government, states, and the local people, is when there is a specific sector that have reached almost collapse. Certain fisheries, for instance, in which the fishing capacity of certain places have reached, a point in which it's not sustainable anymore. So the best solution is to create an area not for to protect an ecosystem, but to protect the actual activity. That means, we are going to protect this area, control the activity, give people specific quotas, and actually close areas that are important for protection because those areas in some way are proved to be helped, to spill over, some resources that are important for certain specific areas. But I would disagree to say that the U.S. has been very proactive in protecting some resources or areas. I think we have been very reactive in many ways. The few cases, I know I may be absolutely wrong here, but I can say that a lot of the few areas that have been protected were marine areas that have been protected as a proactive way is because there's something associated to world or national heritage associated to that. There are many examples of what you say, about the proactive situation in land parks, in the national parks in the United States. In those cases, yes, there are cases in which every sector agreed that some specific park and specific areas or a specific ecosystem is important to protect. But again, I probably am responding to many things, not specifically what you asked for. But I don't think we have been very well. Probably the most recent case. There's a case in Hawaii, the northwest islands of Hawaii, as a Hawaiian name. It's called Papahānaumokuākea. Is the northwest Hawaiian islands that were protected with there was a lot of fisheries issues in there, but that place was protected because the importance of the ecosystem in the Pacific. It was very proactive, but not so in many ways because there was a lot of illegal fisheries, and the Hawaiians wanted to protect that part just for their own fisheries and try to enforce all the illegal fisheries for all the Pacific fleets with different flags that are going around. But that is a very recent marine protected area, and probably it's a good example of being a little bit proactive. But it took a lot of time and a lot of work with the native Hawaiians because it was also a cultural process. Once again, I think there's a cultural heritage component that is important. I think elements like that can be something that people and different actors may consider as something important to unify the interest for protecting a specific area. We can talk about that later.
Okay. Muchas gracias, Gonzalo.